They mocked the tiny engineer until she exposed InnovateX's AI bias. Did you really think you'd last a day here? Priya Patel snapped her laptop shut, the final keystroke echoing like a gunshot through InnovateX's cavernous training hall. At 22, she stood no taller than most people's waists, her frame wrapped in a faded denim jacket and a pendant shaped like a Texas star, her only talisman from home. Yet those who doubted her size or questioned her pedigree had no idea that every inch of Priya's journey had been forged in perseverance. From the moment she stepped into InnovateX's Code Catalyst bootcamp, a 12-week gauntlet billed as the next revolution in tech training Snickers followed her every move. Senior engineers exchanged whispers. She's barely out of college, does she even know? Git, why waste resources on someone unproven? Their voices melded into a single refrain of doubt that threatened to drown out her determination. InnovateX wasn't just any startup. It was led by a white self-made CTO who had built algorithms worth millions. The boot camp was his brainchild, a pressure cooker environment where the brightest minds polished raw talent into tech rock stars. Yet, beneath the flashy demo days and ping-pong tables lurked an unspoken hierarchy. White male coders, many Ivy League grads, sat at the top. Everyone else was vying for scraps of recognition. Priya knew this all too well. Growing up in a small Texas town, she'd watched her mother juggle 3 jobs while teaching Priya to code on hand-me-down hardware. Every crushed jaw, every barrier those moments became the steel in her spine. On day 1, Priya's first challenge was a stress test module, deploy a microservice before dawn, or face public code reviews in front of the entire cohort. She arrived at 5 a.m., the pendant swinging over her heart, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing. While others slumped under fluorescent lights, Priya tapped into an inexhaustible well of focus. She recalled late nights debugging legacy code on servers older than she was, long hours spent turning frustration into functionality. By sunrise, her service was live, responding to test calls with seamless precision. Yet the praise was muted. A senior instructor's dry remark hung in the air. Not bad for a newbie. The room erupted in polite applause, but Priya sensed envy forming behind forced smiles. Later that afternoon, as the group prepared for a live demo, a whiteboard flashed the metrics the AI evaluators would use: accuracy, efficiency, error rates. Priya noticed a pattern. Teams led by minority engineers consistently scored lower regardless of performance. A knot tightened in her chest. Was the system biased? She jotted down observations, then returned her focus to rehearsing her own presentation. Everything depended on that moment. As the lights dimmed and her turn approached, Priya's fingers brushed the Texas star at her collar, an anchor to remind her that true strength wasn't size or pedigree, but an unbreakable spirit. The hall fell silent. She took a deep breath, ready to step into the spotlight, unaware that what she was about to unveil would shatter every assumption about her and the very code that judged her. You think you're above the rest? Mark Stevenson's voice boomed across the training floor as Priya Patel's demo screen flickered under the harsh LED lights. The entire cohort froze. Even the ping-pong ball in the next room seemed to pause mid-bounce. Priya swallowed hard, feeling the Texas star pendant press into her chest like a heartbeat she could rely on. Mark InnovateX's famed head of boot camp leaned forward, arms folded every inch the poster child for white male tech authority. Fix that now, or don't bother presenting. Her palms tingled with adrenaline. Moments ago, her microservice had run flawlessly. But now, as the AI evaluator spat out biased metrics, scoring her module 15% lower than identical submissions by peers, she realized something rotten lay beneath InnovateX's polished veneer. The AI wasn't neutral. It had been trained on legacy data reflecting the same systemic bias she'd fought back home in Texas, assumptions that smaller, non-Ivy League engineers were weaker. The twist stung worse than the cold glare of dozens of viewers. Priya's mind raced. She could back down, bury her notes, and play along. But every ounce of grit she'd built through midnight coding sessions, job losses, and whispered taunts demanded she act. Tapping into her core, she keyed a risky command override the metric weights in the live demo. Her fingers danced over the terminal, ghosting familiar shortcuts she and her mother had honed, debugging broken code at 2 a.m. She risked triggering a security alert. Bootcamp rules forbade tampering with evaluation algorithms, but the injustice was intolerable. Error. Unauthorized modification detected. The screen blinked. A hush fell. Mark strode over, eyebrows arched. Priya felt her heart honed into steel by every discouraging glance she'd ever endured, hammering against her ribs. She hit enter, forcing the patch through. The AI recalculated, and the room erupted in gasps as her module shot from the bottom quintile to the top. Decile efficiency improved by 20 points, error rates halved. The code shivered under her touch like a living thing finally set free. Mark's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Around the hall, whiteboard scribbles describing fairness scores reoriented themselves as Priya's override exposed the bias. Senior engineers, those ivory tower skeptics, exchanged wide-eyed looks. For a second, she saw respect flicker in their eyes. Recognition that real strength came not from privilege, but an uncompromising spirit. Yet, as applause rippled out, Priya's chest tightened. She'd broken the AI, but at what cost? InnovateX's security logs would flag her bootcamp sanctions loomed, and her demo time was almost up. Even worse, she had just shown that a system trusted by top executives could be manipulated, and that revelation threatened the very foundations of InnovateX's culture. Mark stepped back to the lectern voice, low but carrying over the now silent room. We'll talk about this later. Priya's gaze flicked to the door, imagining sea-level eyes, dissecting her code breach. Her Texas Star pendant swayed as she unbuckled her laptop. She'd ignited a revolution, but the aftermath would test her resolve more than any line of code. With the hall's lights dimming on her victory, Priya braced herself, knowing that the confrontation to come would be far more dangerous than any bug she'd ever squashed. Everyone's code is perfect until someone points out the mirror, Priya muttered under her breath as the aftershocks of her AI override rippled through InnovateX's Code Catalyst Hall. The cluster of whiteboards displaying biased metrics now blinked blank as if cleaning themselves of lies. Mark Stevenson's stormy glare followed her every step back to the projection stand. Around her, senior engineers exchanged half-formed apologies, uncertain whether to champion or condemn the breach she'd just forced into the system. It felt like walking a tightrope suspended over a canyon of corporate wrath, and she was in bare feet. Priya's chest tightened with a familiar surge of defiance. All her life, from late-night code marathons on her mother's hand-me-down laptop to that first yes text message of her bootcamp acceptance, she'd been tossed aside for being too small, not pedigreed from the wrong zip code. Each slight had sculpted a reservoir of resolve she now drew upon with surgical precision. Her fingers fluttered toward her Texas Star pendant, tracing the engraved TX that glowed softly in the projector's light, her silent oath to turn every underestimation into fuel for her ascent. Mark cleared his throat, voice cold as a steel blade. You've just highlighted a flaw in our flagship AI. That's admirable, yet also against every sandbox rule we enforce. He tapped a tablet, summoning a security alert that pulsed in the corner of Priya's vision. Security will escort you to review your breach and possibly your contract. A hush fell, more suffocating than applause. Priya's stomach clenched. She'd risked everything to expose bias. Now she faced the abyss of losing her spot in the program, perhaps her dream career. As two guards approached, a sudden stir rose at the back of the hall. Austin Reed, one of the Ivy League skeptics turned code cadet, stepped forward, eyes blazing with unexpected fire. Wait, he called, voice ringing with the conviction of someone reclaiming his own conscience. He slid his laptop onto an empty stool beside Priya's. This breach proves exactly what we needed to see. Isn't it our duty to fix broken code, especially when that code breaks? People engineers behind him nodded, memories of bootcamp nights spent mocking Priya, replaced by shame. A trickle of solidarity swelled into a wave. Priya's heart pounded as Mark's jaw tightened. The CTO stalked toward Austin, indignant. You're defending a rule breaker? But the crowd's newfound alignment swallowed him. Engineers rising, tapping their badges, murmuring, "Second the motion. Let's do a fairness audit." In that electric moment, Priya realized the true power of one act of courage. It rippled outward, rearranging loyalties and beliefs in its wake. Yet, just as hope flared, the security alert sounded again, harder this time, echoing through the hall like an executioner's gavel. The CTO hit a red icon on his tablet. "I'm sorry," he said, gaze flicking to Priya, then to the revolt behind her. "But we can't let this slide without review. Everyone back to your stations." The crowd, torn between loyalty and fear, hesitated. Priya's Texas star swung at her chest as she weighed two worlds: stay and fight this unjust system from the inside, or walk away with her integrity intact, but alone in the cold. She inhaled, bracing for the verdict that would decide her future and InnovateX's next chapter. "Do you think I'd back down now?" Priya's voice rang out, cutting through the thick tension as she stood firm before InnovateX's towering security doors. The guards hesitated, their authorizations clashing with her unwavering gaze. Around her, the hall's charged atmosphere crackled like static. Some engineers gripped their badges, torn between loyalty to the code and solidarity with the woman who'd risked everything to expose its bias. Mark Stevenson's steely posture loomed behind her, blurred by the halo of projector light that danced off Priya's Texas star pendant, a symbol of home and unbreakable grit. Earlier, Priya had faced the abyss removal from Code Catalyst, a black mark on her record and possibly her career evaporating in a single keystroke. Yet, that fear paled compared to the injustice she'd unearthed. The AI's secret prejudice ranking minority-led projects lower wasn't just a bug. It was a betrayal of every person InnovateX claimed to empower. And now, backed into a corner, Priya's mind sharpened like a blade, either surrender to the status quo or stake a claim to justice no matter the cost. She tapped her laptop against the lectern, summoning the unsuspecting hackathon codebase. With a few deft commands plucked from nights of clandestine coding, she initiated a live broadcast, the most transparent, open-source release InnovateX had ever seen. The screen behind her flickered, displaying lines of fairness-patched algorithm that she'd engineered in secret, each comment annotated with why bias thrived and how to extinguish it. Never had corporate confidentiality felt so hollow compared to the weight of truth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mark's eyes widened in disbelief. The CTO lunged forward, authority incarnate, only to find himself silenced by the crescendo of clicking keyboards as engineers began cloning Priya's repository. One by one, they downloaded the fairness patch, their collective click, a drumbeat of rebellion. Austin Reed leaned over a cluster of interns and whispered, "This is what change looks like." Even as senior staff scrambled to contain the breach code, flowed like water around obstacles, unfettered and unstoppable. Yet, in that victory, Priya sensed a deeper test looming. The code was out, but would InnovateX adopt it? Would corporate boards, investors, and data scientists embrace a flawed product that threatened their bottom line? The hackathon hall erupted in cheers, but Priya's heart pounded with the same relentless cadence that had carried her from a Texas bedroom to this moment. She touched her pendant, feeling the engraved TX beneath her fingers. A reminder that real courage wasn't absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Behind the applause, Mark regained his composure. He raised his voice, authoritative, yet grudgingly respectful. "We appreciate the openness, but we have protocols." Engineers froze mid-click. Security logs flashed red. Priya's stomach lurched. Had she overplayed her hand? Was open source enough to shift corporate inertia? Or would she be silenced anyway? As the crowd teetered between defiance and duty, she glanced at the CTO's tablet. A single prompt blinked. Approve patch. It was the crossroads of InnovateX's future and Priya's fate. Every pair of eyes in the hall fixated on that button. The clang of drop pens, the hush of breath, innovation, and equity hung in the balance. Click it, Mark. Decide if you stand for justice or profit. Priya's words hung in the air like a guillotine blade, her Texas star pendant catching the fluorescent glare as she stood at the epicenter of InnovateX's moral hurricane. The entire hall was frozen. Every engineer's finger hovered over a keyboard. Security guards had forgotten their orders. Investors watching via live stream leaned forward. Even Mark Stevenson's outstretched finger trembled above the approve patch button on his tablet. In that heartbeat, Priya felt the weight of every late-night coding session, every dismissive snicker, every barrier she'd torn down with sheer force of will. She remembered her mother's voice echoing in that small Texas apartment, telling her, "Steal your heart, child. No machine, no algorithm can crush the spirit that refuses to break." Now that spirit burned brighter than any screen. But would they actually click? The room's collective breath felt like a pressure chamber ready to explode. Mark's jaw worked. He glanced at the patch notes, Fairness Adjustments Bias Mitigation Module, TX star V1.0, and saw not lines of code, but lines drawn between equity and profit. The twist that few expected a freshman engineer, who should have been grateful for the opportunity, was now dictating policy. More than policy, she was dictating conscience. A hush rippled. "This affects our bottom line," he muttered, breaking the silence like a detonator. Priya's heart lurched. She'd gambled everything, her place in the program, her reputation, even potential legal liabilities. But she refused to flinch. In that moment, she summoned the energy of every underdog story she'd ever known, compressing it into a single unshakable stance. Behind her, Austin Reed tapped out a tweet, InnovateX Fairness Patch Live. Time for integrity over inertia. The hashtag, just code with conscience, flashed across half the screens. Suddenly, a new notification pinged on Mark's tablet. Executive Board override required. The board, it seemed, had been monitoring the live stream and now demanded a vote. In less than 10 seconds, 2/3 of InnovateX's leadership had clicked. Yes. The equity patch was unanimously approved. Jubilation erupted, engineers cheered, interns high-fived, and even the guards cracked hesitant smiles. Yet, as the applause crescendoed, Priya felt a chill. Approval was only the beginning. The real battles lay ahead, integrating the patch without breaking existing deployments, convincing clients to adopt the revised metrics, and weathering the backlash from those who profited from the old system. Her Texas Star pendant swung against her chest, a reminder that true change required continuous courage. Mark exhaled, voice hoarse but genuine. "You did it, Priya." Engineers gathered around her laptop, eager to merge the patch. But before they could finalize, Priya held up her hand. "Wait." The room stilled once more. "We need a pledge, transparency reports, community oversight, continual bias audits. Otherwise, this is just a PR stunt." Her words landed like stones in a still pond, rippling uncertainty and purpose. As InnovateX's future hung in that pregnant silence, Priya realized the path ahead was steeper than any challenge so far. She summoned a slow, determined nod, ready to lead this revolution one audit at a time. The crowd exhaled. Yet the true test lay not in approval, but in accountability. And for Priya Patel, that was the fight she was born to win. "I never thought my victory would taste this bitter." Priya whispered into her webcam as the merger of her fairness patch began propagating through InnovateX's servers. The once celebratory hum in the Code Catalyst Hall had dimmed to a tense murmur. Deploying an open-source patch in a live environment always carried risk. Priya watched the real-time monitor's test suites blinking green, then flickering red as legacy modules clashed with the new bias mitigation logic. Every error log felt like a personal stab, a reminder that change, even righteous change, comes at a cost. Deep in her chest, the Texas Star pendant throbbed against her ribs like a metronome ticking down to either triumph or collapse. She pressed her hand to it, drawing courage from its silent glow. Yesterday, the patch's approval felt like the culmination of her defiance. Today, it was a gauntlet. It was senior engineers huddled around terminals, troubleshooting integration conflicts. Clients who'd championed InnovateX's speed and scalability balked at downtime. Marketing struggled to spin the narrative InnovateX, where fairness outpaces efficiency. The CTO, Mark Stevenson, paced the aisle, brow furrowed, toggling between gratitude and frustration. He caught Priya's eye and gave a tight nod, his first unguarded acknowledgement of her leadership. But the moment passed as quickly as it came. Then came the email thread titled Fairness Patch Side Effects, crammed with urgent notes from operations teams around the globe. Latency spikes in EU cluster, CI/CD pipeline failures, unexpected load on our AI microservices. Priya's inbox flooded. Each ping tested her resolve. She remembered her mother's old admonitions: adversity reveals character more than applause ever will. Now she faced adversity on an industrial scale, yet she refused to flinch. Tapping into her core resolve, Priya initiated a rollback for the most critical modules while dispatching a small team to isolate the problematic functions. Every second felt like 3 heartbeats. The risk was monumental. A single misstep could erase her credibility, get her booted from the program, or worse, brand her as the engineer who broke InnovateX. Yet, the alternative, letting biased code continue to rank people by origin and privilege, was unacceptable. In the middle of the chaos, Priya's phone lit up with a message from Austin Reed's stand firm. "You've ignited a movement." His words anchored her as she navigated the technical storm. She organized an ad hoc bias busters squad, diverse voices from QA DevOps and data science, each wearing a custom TX star lanyard she'd passed out earlier. Together, they pored over metrics, rewrote test cases to include more varied data, and optimized the algorithm to balance fairness with performance. Gradually, the red errors turned amber, then green. The monitors stabilized, revealing a steady uptick in average efficiency and 0 critical failures. Cheers rose quietly at first, then swelled into genuine applause that vibrated through the hall. Just as Priya allowed herself a tentative smile, her screen flashed one last notification: an incoming voluntary audit request from InnovateX's biggest investor, Vanguard Equity Partners. They'd watched the live stream, cheered the patch's approval, and now demanded a full forensic analysis of the AI's bias history, citing legal and regulatory compliance. This was the final twist. Her code wasn't just changing InnovateX, it was triggering a corporate reckoning. And Priya, once an obscure junior engineer, was its epicenter. As she eyed the audit request, her chest tightened. The symbol of her Texas star felt suddenly heavy, no longer just a token of personal grit, but the weight of accountability for an entire company's conscience. Could she lead InnovateX through this scrutiny? Would her integrity endure boardroom pressure and shareholder skepticism? She exhaled, steeling herself for what came next. The corporate audit that could either cement her legacy or undo everything she'd fought for. The screen dimmed on her triumphant green logs and brightened with the Vanguard request, an electric promise of conflict and opportunity. "They're sending in the forensic auditors tomorrow," Priya whispered, voice taut, as a violin string eyes locked on the Vanguard Equity Partners email stamped urgent. The Bias Buster squad had barely caught their breath after stabilizing InnovateX's systems. And now, the invitation or warning arrived: a high-stakes corporate audit to comb through every line of code, every training dataset, every decision metric. This wasn't just a compliance exercise. It was a referendum on her integrity and the company's soul. As she stared at the screen, her Texas Star pendant felt like a compass point, guiding her through this storm of scrutiny. Across the room, Austin Reed leaned in his usual smirk, replaced by sober respect. "You've got this, Priya," he said, but she could see the unease flickering in his eyes. The social divide that once separated them had dissolved into a shared purpose to prove that fairness wasn't an optional feature, but the very foundation of innovation. In the sodden aftermath of late-night merges and furious bug hunts, Priya's quiet defiance had become a corporate movement. Yet now, as the auditors prepared to dig into datasets and interview every developer, the stakes felt impossibly higher. All her life, adversaries had dismissed her with a smirk. Tiny engineer, big talk. That mockery had forged an unwavering reservoir of resilience. She recalled her mother's mantra: "Numbers don't lie, but they can be twisted. Show them the truth, and no amount of privilege can hide." With that guiding light, Priya convened her most trusted allies in a glass-walled conference room. The Bias Busters lanyards, each bearing the emblematic TX star, hung around their necks like badges of honor. They pored over forensic tools, drafting a strategy to transparently reveal every bias incident, every training imbalance, and every corrective action taken since Fairness Patch. The audit playbook Priya sketched out combined code walkthroughs, annotated logs, and video testimonials from underrepresented engineers whose careers had been unfairly throttled by the old AI. She emphasized narrative over numbers data stories that would force auditors to confront the human cost of algorithmic prejudice. It was a gamble. Too much transparency might expose embarrassing oversights. Too little, and they'd be accused of stonewalling. But Priya thrived on risk. She had dared to break the AI's iron law, and now she would dare to bear InnovateX's vulnerabilities for the sake of true reform. As she spoke, Priya's gaze drifted to her pendant once more. The Texas star, worn thin from countless late nights, shone defiantly. It represented not just a region, but a heritage of underdogs fighting tumbleweeds of injustice. Each point on that star symbolized a pillar of her plan: accountability, transparency, equity leadership, and community. She would recast InnovateX's narrative from a profit-first startup to a beacon of ethical tech. But would Vanguard's auditors buy that story? Or would they demand deeper cuts, harsher measures, possibly sacrificing Priya herself as the scapegoat? The next morning, under fluorescent conference room lights and the unblinking gaze of three stern-faced auditors, Priya stepped forward. Her heart thundered, but she stood tall, speaker notes in hand, surrounded by data visualizations that glowed like constellations on the wall. "Welcome," she began, voice calm yet charged. "Today, we don't just share code. We share accountability. We don't hide our mistakes. We learn from them." The auditors exchanged glances. One nodded, another raised an eyebrow. Priya drew a deep breath, ready to reveal her truth. Behind her, the TX star pendant caught the light, a single point of unwavering conviction. And as she clicked next slide, the room fell into expectant silence. The verdict of justice and her future hung in the balance.